I'm Avery Bennett, 33 years old, and after everything I've built for myself, it still doesn't feel like enough for my family. A few weeks before Christmas, I got a call from my mother that felt like a rare invitation, but one I couldn't ignore. "We're making Christmas bigger this year," she said, her voice laced with a cheer I hadn't heard in years. For a brief moment, I thought maybe this year would be different. Maybe this year I'd finally be seen. But as I sat in the conference room of my company in Austin, staring at the holiday message on my phone, I knew better than to expect much. It was just another reminder that no matter how far I've come, no matter how hard I've worked, there would always be someone else sitting at the head of the table. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like you had to prove your worth to those who never seemed to notice. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, with a father who worked long hours managing a retail chain and a mother who had a steady job in a dental office. We weren't wealthy by any means, but the neighborhood knew the Bennetts. Our house was always the one with the bright Christmas lights, the one where everyone gathered for barbecues in the summer. But it wasn't as perfect as it seemed. My younger sister Sabrina was the shining star of our family. She was enrolled in ballet and theater, always the center of attention, and my parents basked in her glow. My father especially always called her his stage girl. My mother would gush about her achievements on Facebook, sharing every new moment of Sabrina's life like it was the greatest thing to happen in the world. Meanwhile, I was the one who spent my time buried in robotics or playing piano in the corner. I didn't fit the mold they had for me. I wasn't interested in performing or being in the spotlight, but I still wanted their love, their attention. I hoped that maybe just once they'd notice me the way they noticed Sabrina. And yet, year after year, I was overlooked. It wasn't that they didn't care for me, it was just that I was supposed to be strong enough to handle things on my own. When I won a statewide programming competition in high school, I thought maybe they'd be proud of me. But when I got home, my mother had already posted a dozen pictures of Sabrina in her homecoming gown, while my picture, small and tucked away, was barely noticed. Those were the small cuts that never stopped stinging, and they built up over time. Every year when the holidays rolled around, I couldn't escape the feeling of being left behind. It wasn't until I graduated high school that I understood the truth. My parents never planned to support me the way they supported Sabrina. My sister had a college fund one that my parents proudly bragged about to the neighbors. I had nothing. I worked long hours that summer applying for scholarships all on my own, and despite the odds, I managed to secure a full-ride scholarship to Ohio State University. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but it was mine. But even as I made my way through college, it became clearer that Sabrina was always the one getting all the attention. She went to an expensive school in Florida, and when she dropped out to pursue a career in content creation, my parents still funded her lifestyle. I watched as she went to beach parties, brunches, and glamorous events, while I worked late nights at a cafe and studied relentlessly to build a future on my own. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter that I was stronger for it. But deep down, I knew that no matter what I did, I would never be the one my parents truly recognized. I thought Christmas might be different that year. For once, I hoped my family might truly want me there, not just because they had no other choice, but because I was their daughter. But when the invitation came, it felt more like an obligation. And then a week later came the call from my father. It wasn't just any call. It was the kind of call that cuts deep and leaves no room for misunderstanding. "You shouldn't come home for Christmas this year," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. The Corrals would be there. The house would be too crowded. Sabrina needed to shine, and I didn't fit the image they wanted to present. I stared at the refund button on my flight ticket, knowing what I had to do. For years, I had been a spectator, never truly part of the family gatherings. I clicked that button. I canceled my flight, and for the first time in years, I stopped pretending that their rejection didn't hurt. The pain of not being wanted by your own family is something that lingers even when you refuse to acknowledge it. But in that moment, I knew that it was time to stop waiting for an invitation. I would build my own table. When I hung up the phone with my father, I felt like I was back at square one. That familiar ache in my chest, the one I'd tried to bury for years, was there again. The words, "You don't fit the picture," kept echoing in my mind. That's what it always came down to, wasn't it? My parents didn't want me around, not because of who I was, but because I didn't match the perfect image they'd built of their family. They didn't want to acknowledge me because I was different, and I was always going to be different. It wasn't just that they had their favorites, it was that they made it clear. Sabrina had always been the golden child. While I spent my days buried in textbooks or programming, Sabrina was always in the spotlight. Ballet recitals, choir performances, school plays. My parents were always there, front and center, cheering her on. Every success of hers was like a stamp of approval for them. I couldn't help but feel like the background noise to her life. They showered her with praise and opportunities while I was left to navigate everything alone. And the worst part? They didn't even see what they were doing. They never questioned it. I remember that one time in high school when I made it to the finals of a citywide piano competition. The teachers were excited, and they promised to send my parents an invitation. But on the morning of the performance, my mother told me, "Your father has to take Sabrina to rehearsal, and I have a hair appointment for her. You'll be fine. Take the bus." I remember sitting there waiting for the applause, but it never came. When the performance ended, I scanned the room for any familiar faces. The only thing I found was empty seats. The real punch came when I overheard my parents one night thinking I was asleep. My mother had whispered to my father, "Sabrina is fragile. If she falls, she'll never get back up. But Avery, she's strong. She can handle it." Those words cut through me like a knife. I wasn't weak. I didn't need their help to survive. But what hurt the most was the realization that they never saw me as someone deserving of their love or care. They saw me as a backup, as someone who didn't need attention because I could stand on my own. And in a way, I did stand on my own, but it wasn't because they taught me to, it was because I had to. Despite all of this, I never stopped trying to prove myself. I worked harder, pushed further, hoping one day I would finally earn their approval. When it was time to go to college, I knew I had to do it all by myself. Sabrina had a trust fund. My parents were so proud of her, always boasting to the neighbors about her future. But I was on my own. I worked tirelessly, applied for every scholarship I could find, and when I finally received my acceptance letter from Ohio State University with a full scholarship to study computer science, I couldn't believe it. This was my chance to prove I was just as capable as anyone else. But when I arrived in Columbus, the reality of my situation settled in. I wasn't like Sabrina. I didn't have my parents' backing. I didn't have their attention or their money. What I did have was determination, and I would make sure it was enough. I threw myself into my studies, worked part-time jobs to make ends meet, and pushed myself harder than I ever thought possible. Meanwhile, Sabrina was off in Florida, living a life full of opportunities, knowing her path would always be easier because our parents would always be there to cushion her fall. By the time I graduated, things hadn't changed much. Sabrina was still the star of the family, even though she had dropped out of school to pursue a career in content creation. I knew that my parents would continue to support her in whatever she chose to do, no questions asked. And there I was, still working multiple jobs, still scraping by. But I wasn't jealous. I didn't need their money or their approval. I just needed to make it on my own. So I took a job at a small tech startup in Denver, and for the first time I was doing something for myself, something that wasn't about fitting into someone else's image of what I should be. The loneliness I felt didn't go away. It followed me to Denver, then to Austin, where I started a new chapter at Lumen Bridge. But the isolation was different now. It was self-imposed. I had built this life brick by brick without the help of my family, and for that I could be proud. I no longer needed them to tell me I was worth something. I had earned it myself. But as the years went by, the sting of being left out of family events, of always being the one who didn't fit, began to weigh on me again. When I finally built Lumen Bridge into something successful, I thought maybe, just maybe, my family would take notice. But they didn't. They never did. It was as though everything I had worked for was invisible to them. I wasn't their golden child, their shining star, and I never would be. Instead, I kept moving forward, making my own place in the world. But there was a part of me that still wanted to be seen, that still wanted them to notice. And then came that Christmas phone call. My parents were once again preparing for a holiday filled with their perfect picture of family. Sabrina was coming home, and I wasn't even sure if I was invited anymore. When I tried to make plans to come back, I got the message loud and clear it wasn't the right time. Their house was full. They didn't have space for me. I wasn't part of the picture they wanted to show. It hurt, more than I care to admit. But it was also the moment when I knew something had to change. If they wouldn't make room for me, then I would make my own way. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their approval. I was strong enough to build my own family, one where I could be seen and appreciated for who I truly was, not who they wanted me to be. That year, I decided to stop waiting for their permission. I would create my own future. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. I had let go of the idea that I had to fit into their world. I would create my own. After I canceled my flight that year, I kept my head down and focused on work. It wasn't easy to shake off the hurt, but I had learned to move forward even if it felt like I was doing it alone. The sting of being left out never fully faded, but I tried not to dwell on it. Instead, I threw myself into Lumen Bridge. It became more than just a company. It was my escape. Every new project, every late-night coding session, every small win, it was a reminder that I was building something on my own, something that had nothing to do with my family. And yet every Christmas call, every birthday passed without so much as a simple greeting, felt like a small punch to the gut. I spent the next few years away from home, trying to create my own world, one where I could breathe without feeling like I was always trying to prove myself. Austin became my new home, the city where I finally felt like I could take up space. The bustling streets, the energy in the air, it was everything Columbus wasn't. There I met people who saw me for who I was, not just as the other daughter. Leah in particular was my anchor. She understood what it felt like to struggle for validation. She'd seen me through sleepless nights the same way she now watched as I built my business piece by piece. Leah and I would sit for hours, her kitchen warm with the smell of dinner, and we'd talk about everything. But there was one thing: we never talked about my family. Every time the holidays came around, I told myself it didn't matter that I was better off without their superficial approval. But as each year passed, it got harder to believe that. My parents' absence in my life wasn't a surprise anymore, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. It still hurt no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise. And the worst part was that no one even noticed. It wasn't just that they didn't call. They didn't care enough to even check in. It was as if I had never existed for them, except when they needed something to show off. It wasn't until one late December evening while I was sitting in my small office at Lumen Bridge that I realized just how far I'd come in all the years I'd been on my own. I had built a thriving company surrounded by people who respected me. My team, my clients, the investors who believed in me, they all saw my worth. And yet there was still a quiet, lingering emptiness I couldn't shake. I'd done it all without my parents' help, but in the back of my mind, there was always that small voice asking, "What if?" That night I sat by my desk, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, but I couldn't focus. The email from my mother had come in just that morning. She had sent a message that was both curt and cold, as if she were reminding me of an old obligation. "This year isn't convenient. The house is full. Too many guests. Save it for another time." My heart sank as I read it again. The coldness in her words cut through me, and for the first time I found myself unable to shake the feeling of abandonment. It wasn't the first time they'd excluded me from family events, but this time felt different. I had worked so hard to convince myself that I was fine, that I didn't need them. But the truth was, I had always wanted to be seen by them. I wanted to be part of the family, even if they had already made it clear I never would be. As I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, I knew I couldn't keep waiting for their acceptance. I had spent so much of my life wishing for their approval, but that was never going to happen. And even though it still hurt, I knew I had to stop looking to them for validation. I had built something on my own, something that was mine and mine alone. There was no room for them at my table. If I wanted to be seen, I would have to make my own seat. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity. For the first time, I wasn't holding on to the hope that things could be different. I realized that I didn't need them to love me or approve of me. I was enough as I was. So I went to work. I spent the day drafting a 5-year plan for Lumen Bridge, mapping out the next phase of our growth. It felt empowering to make decisions without anyone else's approval. I was finally free from the need for anyone's permission. But then, a few days later, my phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from Sabrina. She had emailed me asking if I could meet for coffee. The request caught me off guard. Sabrina and I hadn't spoken much since I left for college. She had always been distant, lost in her own world while I was building mine, but now she wanted to talk. I wasn't sure what had prompted her to reach out, but something told me it wasn't going to be simple. I stood there looking at the message, my mind racing. What could she possibly want from me? It was the first time in years that she had made an effort to connect, and it left me feeling uneasy. But deep down, I also knew this could be the start of something new, a chance to understand why things had turned out the way they had. Part of me hoped that maybe this time things would be different. Maybe Sabrina was finally ready to have a real conversation, one that didn't center on comparisons or expectations. I replied, agreeing to meet at a cafe the next day. But even as I hit send, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something that might change everything. I wasn't sure what to expect from Sabrina, but I knew I had reached a point where I wasn't going to shrink back anymore. This conversation, whatever it turned out to be, would be different. It had to be. As I walked to the cafe the next day, I couldn't help but feel a knot in my stomach. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was something I had to do. I was ready to face whatever came next, even if it meant confronting the past head-on. The door to the cafe opened, and I stepped inside, knowing that my life was about to shift in ways I couldn't yet understand. When I walked into the cafe that morning, I had no idea what to expect from Sabrina. We hadn't talked much in years, and our relationship had always been strained. I wasn't sure if she was looking for a reconciliation or just checking off some kind of obligation. Still, I agreed to meet her. After all, I had been the one who had built a life far from my family. But maybe, just maybe, this could be a turning point. It felt like the right thing to do, but as I stepped into the cafe, I couldn't shake the nerves tightening in my chest. She was already sitting at a corner table when I walked in. Sabrina looked different, older, more put together. She smiled when she saw me, but there was something behind that smile that didn't quite match the picture-perfect image I'd always seen. I hesitated for a moment before walking over to her table. As I sat down, she didn't say anything right away. For the first time, it wasn't the usual chatter about her latest accomplishment or some new project she was working on. It was just silence. And it was strange. "I never thought you'd actually agree to meet," she finally said, her voice softer than I remembered. I didn't know how to respond to that. It wasn't like Sabrina to admit vulnerability, but here she was trying to make small talk like this was any ordinary meeting between two sisters who hadn't seen each other in years. I gave her a small smile, but didn't respond immediately. I was still processing why she was reaching out. I'd spent so many years trying to prove myself without her or anyone else's approval. The idea that she wanted to connect now seemed strange. But Sabrina was still Sabrina, always charming, always able to make a room feel like it belonged to her. As we talked, I couldn't help but notice the way her words danced around the topics that mattered most. She was still the center of attention in her own world, and I was the one who had built my own. It was a quiet realization, but it came with a weight I hadn't expected. I wasn't sure if it was disappointment or simply acceptance, but it was there all the same. I've been thinking a lot about everything Sabrina said, leaning in slightly. Her eyes, usually so sure of themselves, seemed distant now, about how we've drifted apart. She paused, looking down at her coffee, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. It was the first time in a long time that I saw her unsure of herself. It wasn't the Sabrina I knew, the one who always knew how to fill a room with noise. This version of her seemed tired. And honestly, I don't even know where to start. I felt a flicker of something between hurt and curiosity. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't even apologizing, really. But it was as close as I'd ever gotten to hearing her acknowledge the years of neglect, of being sidelined while she stood in the spotlight. I couldn't bring myself to say anything at first. The words that came to mind didn't feel right, so I just listened. "I guess I always thought you'd be fine," she continued, her voice trailing off as if she were trying to figure out how to say what she meant. "You were always so strong. You didn't need anyone." I blinked, surprised by her words. It wasn't the first time I'd heard them. My parents had said the same thing to me my entire life. "You're tough. You can handle it." But this time, coming from Sabrina, it felt different. It wasn't a statement made from distance, but one made with some kind of understanding, or at least an attempt at it. "You know it's funny," she said with a small laugh, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to think everything I did was for them, but now I think I've been doing it for myself all along. It's like I've been chasing their approval and not even realizing it." She sighed deeply, resting her chin on her hand, staring at the steam rising from her cup. "I've never really stopped to think about how you felt." I swallowed hard. This was more than I had ever expected from her. It wasn't a grand apology, but it was something I had never gotten from my parents either. For a moment I wondered if this was just another act, another way to make herself look good. But I wasn't here to judge her anymore. I had my own life to lead, one that didn't revolve around being second place. I've been so focused on what I didn't have, I said the words coming out before I could stop them, that I never stopped to think about what you needed. I paused, trying to gather my thoughts, unsure of where this conversation was leading. But in that moment, I realized that maybe this was the beginning of something. Maybe we weren't so different after all. Sabrina nodded slowly, as if processing everything I said. There was a long pause between us, and it was the kind of silence that felt heavy. Not with guilt, but with something that had been left unsaid for so long. Something that might have been buried in the past, but was finally starting to come to light. She sat back in her chair, her hands clasped together, and looked at me with a quiet resolve. "Maybe we've both been trying to fit into a mold that was never ours," she said, her voice steady, but laced with a hint of regret. I nodded, but didn't reply. The truth was, I didn't know how to feel about all of this. Sabrina was right. We had both spent so many years trying to live up to expectations that weren't even our own. My parents' expectations, Sabrina's perfect image, and the path I had carved out for myself. It was all starting to blur together. As we sat there in that cafe, sipping our coffee, I realized this wasn't going to be some dramatic family reunion. It wasn't about apologizing or blaming. It was about understanding. And that was something neither of us had ever really been given. Maybe this was the first step, but I didn't know where it would lead. I got up to leave feeling a sense of quiet relief. Whatever this was, it wasn't finished yet, but it was a start. For once, I wasn't trying to fit into someone else's idea of what I should be. I was finally starting to shape my own path, and that was enough for now. The rest would come in time. As I walked out the door, I took a deep breath. There was still a long way to go. But for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't walking alone. And that in itself felt like progress. The days after my meeting with Sabrina passed slowly. We didn't talk much after that, and it was as if we had both retreated into our own worlds, each of us trying to make sense of what had just transpired. I thought about what she had said about how she'd been chasing our parents' approval her whole life, and how in her own way she had been trapped by the same expectations that had held me back for so long. But for me, there was something different about that conversation. It wasn't just about trying to get Sabrina to understand me or vice versa. It was about realizing that I wasn't going to wait for anyone to give me what I needed anymore. I had done that for too long. I couldn't count how many times I had looked to my parents for approval, only to find that their focus was always on Sabrina. How many times I had tried to prove I was enough only to have them dismiss it because I wasn't the one they had chosen to lift up. But after that conversation with Sabrina, I felt something shift within me. I wasn't that little girl anymore hoping for attention from a family who didn't even know how to love me. I was an adult, a CEO, a woman who had built something for herself from nothing. And that was enough. I focused on Lumen Bridge with a new sense of determination. The company was my pride and joy, and I had worked tirelessly to build it. It was more than just a business to me. It was a reflection of who I was, of everything I had accomplished despite the odds. My team had grown to include talented people who respected my vision, and we were on the verge of something big. But as my company continued to rise, I couldn't help but wonder if my parents would ever acknowledge it. Would they ever see what I had done? Would they ever understand what it meant to create something from scratch, with no help, no support, and no safety net? I didn't have the answer, but I did know this. I wasn't going to wait around for them to change. I had learned that the hard way. My life, my success, it was mine. No one else could take credit for it. No one else could take it from me, and I wasn't going to let them make me feel like I had to apologize for it anymore. It was that same mindset that led me to make a decision I had been avoiding for a long time. I was going to take the next step in my company, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone hold me back. We were going to scale. I'd been running Lumen Bridge out of a small office for a while, but the demand was growing, and I knew it was time to expand. I started planning our move to a larger space. We needed more employees, more resources, and more room to grow. The future felt like it was finally within reach. But as much as I focused on building my future, I couldn't ignore the past that seemed to hang over me. My parents' absence had become a constant presence in my life, a reminder of the years I had spent fighting for their attention and affection. And though I told myself I didn't need them, that I had built something on my own, a small part of me still hoped for that recognition. I wasn't sure if I could let that go. It wasn't about needing them anymore. It was about wanting something that had always been out of reach. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I found myself sitting in my office staring at the dim lights of the Austin skyline outside my window. I had been in the city for a few years now, building a life that didn't revolve around anyone but myself, and yet I still felt like there was something missing. I looked down at the pile of holiday cards on my desk, the ones I had yet to open. They were all from clients and business partners' cards that were polite but distant. I didn't have any family cards this year, not that I was surprised. Sabrina hadn't even reached out. I knew it was time to stop waiting. I couldn't keep building my life around the hope that my parents would suddenly change, or that Sabrina would one day see me for who I truly was. I had to move forward not just in my career, but in my personal life as well. I was done waiting for approval. It was time to take control. The next day, I made a call that would change everything. I reached out to a real estate agent about a larger office space. We needed a place that could accommodate our growing team, a place where we could expand and really show what Lumen Bridge could become. I didn't hesitate. It was a big move, but I knew it was the right one. It was a commitment to my vision, to the future I was building, and to the belief that I deserved to take up space. And as I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I didn't need my family's approval. I didn't need to keep fighting for a seat at a table that was never meant for me. I was building my own. The office space wasn't just about more room for the company. It was a declaration that I had outgrown the need for validation. It was mine, and that was enough. That night, after a quiet dinner with Leah, I found myself thinking about the next chapter. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about growth in every sense of the word. Leah had been right when she said forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, it was about taking control of your own life, of not letting past wounds continue to define you. And though I knew I wasn't ready to forgive my family entirely, I also knew I was ready to move forward with or without them. The next few months brought even more challenges, but they also brought progress. Our team expanded and our revenue began to climb. Lumen Bridge was becoming a force to be reckoned with, and it felt good to know that it was mine. I was building something that was truly my own. But even as the company grew, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Or rather, someone. One day in the middle of a meeting, I got a message from my mother. It wasn't a Christmas card, nor was it a typical message from her. This one felt different. "We've been thinking about things," it said. "We're sorry for the way things have been. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, the words sinking in. Was this really happening? Was this the moment I had been waiting for? As I thought about it, I realized something important. I had finally created a life where I didn't need their approval. I was standing tall not because of their love, but because I had earned it on my own. Still, part of me wondered if this was the beginning of a new chapter 1 where I could finally have the family I had always dreamed of. And part of me was ready to see where that could take me. It was one of those mornings when everything felt ordinary until the moment it didn't. I had just finished a meeting at the office and I was heading back to my desk when my phone buzzed. It was an email from my mother. I stopped in my tracks, my heart skipping a beat. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, and when I did, it was always brief and impersonal. But this time, the subject line was different. We've been thinking about things. I opened the email, and as I read, I felt a strange combination of disbelief and hope. The message was short, but clear. We've been thinking about things, Avery. We're sorry for the way things have been. Can we talk? It took me a few moments to process the words. I didn't know what to make of it. Apology, I hadn't heard that word from them in years. It was unexpected, but not unwelcome. Still, I wasn't sure what they wanted or why they were reaching out now. Could it be real, or was it just another attempt to smooth things over when it suited them? I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, the weight of the moment pressing on me. It was the kind of email you don't know how to respond to. Do you ignore it and move on? Or do you let yourself feel that tiny spark of hope? The hope that maybe, just maybe this time, things could be different. I glanced at the clock and then at the calendar. The holiday season was fast approaching. I had been so focused on work, so determined to keep pushing forward, that I hadn't thought about Christmas much at all. But now with this email, everything felt different. The weight of my past, of all the years I had spent trying to make them see me to prove I was enough, came flooding back. For a moment, it was hard to breathe. I picked up my phone and called Leah. She was always the one I could count on when things got heavy. It rang a few times before she picked up. "Hey, what's going on?" she asked, her voice warm and steady, just like always. "I just got an email from my mom," I said, trying to keep my voice even. They want to talk. They're sorry for the way things have been." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear Leah processing the words, trying to understand them from my side. "Wow," she said finally. "That's a big step, right? I mean, you've been waiting for something like this for a long time." "Yeah," I said, my voice trailing off. "But I don't know what to make of it. I haven't heard from them like this in years, and honestly, I don't know if I can just jump back into everything like nothing happened." "You don't have to," Leah said, and I could hear the certainty in her tone. "It's up to you how you handle this. Just don't forget how far you've come. You built a life for yourself without them. You've already proven you don't need them. But if you're ready to have that conversation, if you want to see where it goes, I'm here." I sighed and leaned back in my chair, running my fingers through my hair. Leah was right. I had built this life on my own. I didn't need them, but maybe it was time to see if they had changed. Maybe it was time to see if there was a chance for us to rebuild what had been broken. "I'll think about it," I said softly. "I just don't know what to expect." "I get it," she replied. "Just take it one step at a time. You don't have to have all the answers now." I hung up the phone and sat there for a long moment staring at the email again. It felt like a weight was lifting off my chest, but it was also still there lingering. It wasn't the answer I had been waiting for, but it was a step in a new direction. I had spent so many years thinking that my worth depended on their approval, but now I knew it didn't. I had built something for myself. I had created my own path, and I was proud of it. Still, there was a part of me that wondered if I could ever truly let go of the hope that one day they would see me. Maybe this conversation would help me answer that question once and for all. The next few days were filled with anticipation. I was trying to focus on work on the future of Lumen Bridge, but my mind kept drifting back to that email. Should I reply? Should I let them in, even just a little? Finally, I decided to send a simple response. "Let's talk." When would be a good time I hit send before I could second-guess myself? That night, I sat down with a glass of wine thinking about the conversation to come. Part of me felt nervous. What if things didn't go the way I hoped? What if the conversation only brought back all the hurt I had spent so many years pushing aside? But another part of me knew this was something I had to do, if only to finally close that chapter, whatever the outcome. The next morning, my phone rang. It was my mother. I took a deep breath and answered. "Avery," she said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "Thank you for agreeing to talk. I'm listening," I said, keeping my tone steady, trying not to let the nerves show. The conversation began slowly, and at first it was awkward, but over the course of the call something shifted. My mother apologized for everything, the years of neglect, the favoritism, the way she had treated me like I didn't matter. She admitted that she had been wrong, that she had always placed too much of her focus on Sabrina and never stopped to see how much I had given up to get by. It wasn't easy to hear, but it was a start. We talked for a while longer, and by the end of the call, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was relief, but also uncertainty. I didn't know if this was enough, but it was a step in the right direction. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally being seen, not as the backup daughter, but as someone who mattered in her own right. But as I hung up the phone, I knew the hard part was just beginning. Rebuilding the trust, healing the wounds, it wasn't going to happen overnight. Still, this was the first time I felt like I wasn't fighting alone anymore. The conversation was a step forward, but I knew the road to real reconciliation would be long. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. It wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about finally owning my place in the world, and that I realized was the most important thing of all. After that call with my mother, I spent days turning over what had happened, feeling like I was trying to understand a conversation I hadn't quite had yet. They were sorry. They wanted to talk. Part of me felt relieved, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But another part of me felt that familiar hesitation creeping in. It was hard to let go of the past, to accept that my parents had made a decision to reach out when it felt like they had never really chosen me. But I wasn't a child anymore. I didn't need them to fix everything. I had built a life for myself, one that didn't revolve around their expectations or approval. Lately, I'd been reminded that no matter how much I wished for their love, I had to start giving that love to myself. And part of that was learning that I didn't need to prove myself to anyone, not even them. Still, the idea of having them in my life again, even just a little, brought up feelings I hadn't realized I still carried. The next few weeks passed in a blur, filled with meetings and growth at Lumen Bridge. I kept pushing forward because that was what I was good at. But there was something different now, something underneath the constant hustle. I wasn't just working anymore. I was building something I was proud of, something that felt mine in a way I had never felt before. I still had the weight of my family's absence in my life, but it didn't control me anymore. I had found my own path, one that didn't depend on anyone else's recognition. Then one morning I received a message from Sabrina. I had expected her to keep her distance after everything that had happened, but instead she sent a short, simple message. "I want to make things right. Can we talk?" I wasn't sure what to make of it. But after everything that had happened over the past year, I knew I had to face it head on. I had spent years building walls, protecting myself from the pain of being overlooked, of being forgotten. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to let those walls come down, if only for a moment. We agreed to meet at a small cafe in the city. When I walked in, I saw Sabrina already seated, looking like she had something important to say. I could see the same familiar spark in her eyes, but there was something different in the way she carried herself. She wasn't the same confident, always in the spotlight Sabrina I had known for so long. This Sabrina was quieter, more vulnerable. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, as I sat down across from her. Her voice was softer than usual, as if she was treading carefully. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Avery, about everything." I nodded, not knowing what to expect. The years of silence between us had created so much space. It felt like we were both standing on the edge of something new, unsure of how far we could go. "I know I've messed up," she continued, her gaze fixed on the table. "And I know I've been selfish. I've spent so much time focusing on myself, on getting attention, that I never stopped to think about how you felt." I swallowed hard. Hearing her say those words out loud was almost more than I could handle. For so long, I had carried the weight of her success and our parents' favoritism, always feeling like I was the one left behind. And now, here she was admitting it. I wasn't sure what to do with that or how to react. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Sabrina said, glancing up at me for the first time. "But I want you to know I see you. I see what you've done, and I see how hard you've worked. I've been blind to that for a long time." I took a deep breath, the words I had been holding on to for so long bubbling to the surface. "I don't need you to see me, Sabrina. I've been doing this on my own for a long time now. What I need is for you to understand that I can't keep waiting for things to be different. I can't keep waiting for you to acknowledge me or for them to finally notice me." Sabrina's eyes softened, and for the first time in years, I felt like she was truly listening. I wasn't asking for an apology or for her to suddenly change. What I wanted was for her to recognize the truth of what had happened and to accept that it had shaped me into who I was today. I wasn't the backup daughter anymore. I wasn't the one left behind. I had built a life, a company, and a future that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. "I've spent so much time trying to prove myself to them, to you, to everyone," I continued. "But now I'm done. I've done it on my own, and I'm proud of that." Sabrina nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on me. "I get it. I'm sorry, Avery. I never realized how much you were carrying. But I'm here now. I want to try if you'll let me." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had spent so long closing myself off, convincing myself that their love didn't matter, that it was too late to change anything. But sitting across from Sabrina, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was room for something new between us. It wouldn't be perfect and it wouldn't fix everything, but it could be the start of something different. "I'm not asking for everything to be fixed overnight," I said, my voice steady, "but I'm willing to see where this goes. If you really want to make things right, we have to take it one step at a time." Sabrina smiled, a soft, genuine smile that felt like a small weight lifting from both of us. "One step at a time," she agreed. We sat there for a while, just talking, catching up on everything we had missed. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was real. And for the first time in years, it felt like we were moving forward. Later that night, I sat in my apartment thinking about everything that had happened. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. And for once I felt like I wasn't walking alone. But as the days passed, I knew that the road ahead would still be long. Rebuilding trust, healing old wounds, it was going to take time. But I had finally learned that I didn't need to carry the past on my own anymore. I didn't need to wait for someone else to validate me. I had already done that for myself, and that I realized was the most important part of this journey. I sat back in my chair, the dim light from my desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. It was late, but my mind refused to quiet. I had just wrapped up another long day at the office, another milestone achieved. Lumen Bridge was expanding faster than I could have imagined, and I couldn't help but feel a quiet pride in everything I'd built. But for all the growth in my life, for all the success I had found, there was one thing I had learned along the way. It wasn't the business that defined me. It was how I chose to stand in the world. The years of feeling unseen, of living in the shadows of my family's expectations, had shaped me in ways I hadn't fully understood until now. For a long time, I believed that success was something I had to prove to others, that I had to work harder, go further, just to earn a seat at a table that was never really meant for me. I had spent so much time trying to fit myself into their world, trying to be the daughter they could be proud of, that I forgot one simple truth. I didn't need them to define me. I didn't need to keep waiting for their approval or for Sabrina's. The moment I realized that was the moment, everything started to shift. My parents, who had always placed so much of their energy into lifting up Sabrina, had finally recognized what I had done. And while I hadn't needed their acknowledgement to succeed, it was still a strange, bittersweet moment of realization. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had finally been seen. And it wasn't because they had changed, it was because I had stopped waiting for them to. Over the past few months, I had felt the stirrings of something new between me and Sabrina. I wasn't sure what it would mean or where it would go, but it felt like we were finally speaking the same language. We weren't the same people we had been as children, each of us trapped in the roles that our parents had set for us. We were two adults, each trying to figure out how to be in the world without the shadows of family expectations hanging over us. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't walking that path alone. Sabrina, in her own way, was coming to terms with the truth of who we were. She had stepped into a job at Lumen Bridge, starting at the bottom, just like anyone else. The road ahead for her wasn't easy, but I could see the difference in her. There was a quiet determination in her now, something I hadn't seen before. I wasn't sure if we could ever completely erase the past, but I did know this: we were moving forward. And as for my parents, well, that was still a work in progress. They were trying in their own way to rebuild a relationship with me. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments when the old habits resurfaced, but it was different. It wasn't about them suddenly becoming perfect parents. It was about recognizing that they couldn't control everything anymore. I had found my place in the world, not because of them, but despite them. And that was enough for me. I thought back to the conversations I had with Leah, her words echoing in my mind. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiving means you stop letting the old wound drive your life. I had spent so many years holding on to that wound, thinking that if I just tried harder, if I just proved myself enough, everything would fall into place. But now I understood true strength came from letting go. It came from choosing not to let the past define me, but to shape my own future. And that was something no one else could take away. As I looked out the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, I couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of peace. The world hadn't always been kind to me. My family hadn't always been the ones to support me. But I had built something for myself, something real. And that was the only thing that mattered. The love, the approval, the acceptance I had longed for, they would come when they were meant to. But for now, I was content, knowing that I had built my own table, and I didn't need to beg for a seat at anyone else's. Christmas came and went as it always did. I spent it with Leah and her family, who had become my own. There was laughter, warmth, and the kind of love that didn't ask for anything in return. It was the kind of holiday I had always dreamed of, a place where I didn't have to pretend, where I could simply be myself. And then one afternoon my mother called again. This time, it wasn't an apology. It wasn't an invitation to a family dinner. It was just a call to say, "How are you doing?" There was a softness in her voice, a recognition that hadn't been there before. We talked for a while about nothing and everything, and when the call ended, I felt a strange sense of closure. I didn't need them to be perfect. I didn't need them to be the parents I had always wanted. What I needed was to let go of the need for them to be anything at all. And in that moment, I realized that I had finally found peace, not in their approval, but in myself. So I keep building. I keep growing. And as I do, I hold on to one simple truth: I built this life. And no one, not my parents, not Sabrina, not anyone, can ever take that away from me. If you've ever found yourself struggling to find your place in the world, just know this: you don't need anyone's approval to build the life you deserve. Your worth is not defined by the opinions of others. It's defined by how you see yourself. And when you stop waiting for others to notice, you'll realize that the only seat at the table that matters is the one you've created for yourself. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've been in a similar situation, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about finding strength and creating your own path.